So hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us this morning at our different time of 9 a.m. Great to see so many of you here first thing, and very, very warm welcome to Lesley Thomson, who I'm thrilled to be talking to because I've just been absolutely engrossed in your latest book, The Companion, which I just couldn't put down. I love it. So welcome to Goldster. Thank you so much for being part of the Goldster family. And we're going to talk to you today about your writing career in general, but we're also going to talk about The Companion.
That's great. It's so exciting to be here. Thank you, Lucinda.
And I just love Lesley's room. Look at this. She's got on a poster behind her for her book, A Kind of Vanishing. It's just great. This is a proper writer's den, and I absolutely love that. So before we get on to your writing, tell us, did you always want to be a writer, or did you just kind of fall into this, or did you do lots of other jobs beforehand?
I've done, beforehand, lots of other jobs is the answer. Beforehand and during, and less so now, I have to say. But yes, I've done all sorts of jobs always to support the writing, which I think hampered me in lots of ways, because it meant that, I would do a job that I was good at and then I'd get promoted, but my heart was never properly in it. I mean, I ended up being the customer services manager for one of the first internet companies, which grew from being an attic in Blackheath to being 3 large buildings in Docklands, and I'm still, well, the attic in Blackheath, but a much larger building there too, which I was managing. And that would be most people's idea of success. And my salary was going up, exponentially, because the internet was this is 96, and the only person I knew the email address was the woman sitting next to me in the office. So in the beginning, obviously. And, but I always wanted to write. So there was always this nagging thing. I mean, I was writing, but I wasn't one of those people who can sort of write a novel on the train in the mornings, or I do need to be engrossed and really involved in it.
Yeah.
So then I got headhunted and I became a consultant in technology and so on. I worked for a playwright agency. This is going back a bit, for a playwright agency, and I was managing the royalties for the estates of Noel Coward and Terence Rattigan, for example.
Wow.
All of that, of course, was slightly galling, because I wanted to be writing and getting royalties too. So it was just, it's a really hard one. I just had to stop, really. And my mum got ill, got Parkinson's in her early 60s, actually, but it became more serious in her mid-70s. And I just decided, right, I'm going to do a part-time job again, like I used to do when I was younger. By this time, I was in my 40s. Be around for her, and I'll write. And she was really keen I should write. She said, you are a writer, you've got to write. So if I turned up there, she'd say, have you written today? Or she'd make me sit and write.
That's what you need. That's absolutely what you need.
So yeah, that's really how, I wrote another. I had written a novel by this time, I should add, and I haven't mentioned that bit. So this would be my second novel. I wrote it. Took 7 years because of all the work I was doing otherwise. Got it published, and it won a prize. And after that, things went up, which was great.
Fantastic. So tell us about your first novel. The first, I believe, is 7 Miles from Sydney.
That's right.
So you were living in Australia at the time, and tell us, because it seems to have been extremely dramatic and inspired you to write this novel.
Yeah, when I was living in Australia, I wanted to travel. I'm not a great traveller, so I wanted to land somewhere and then just live. And I could speak the language, well, up to a point, in Australia. So I thought I was, because I hadn't got a second language to any degree. And anyway, I wanted to go further than, say, France or whatever. So I was living in Australia, and I was trying to write then. And a person who was really encouraging me there was Miranda Downs, Mandy, to me, who was about 10 years older than me, and one of those people who just full of life and full of verb. And she had been a secretary for a film production company, and just happened to chat with the man who ran it in the evening, having a drink after work. And she said she had this idea for a script, which was about the Burley Bra Company in the 1920s. And he said, that's a great idea, write the script. And okay, I mean, she wanted to write. It was like me, she wanted to write. So that was her break. So she wrote a script and he made the film, and it did very well. And then she was asked to write a miniseries. So that, and I'd by this time come back to England, but while I was there, I had shown her the writing I was doing. And I was at that time working in an underground station in Sydney selling newspapers, which was, I think it remains one of my favorite jobs, you know, because it was about people. I was selling, and it was a stall, like a sort of W.H. Smith's type stall, owned by the New South Wales Railways Authority. I had to wear a turquoise uniform, overall, and which I couldn't bear, and I started to fill it up because I was eating too many crunchy bars. Anyway, to the point being, I would show Mandy my work, and she was great because she wasn't just going, "Oh, this is lovely, Lesley." I mean, none of us need that, do we? She was, you know, she would raw her head off sometimes at the most serious bits. But apart from that, she would give me really good advice about edit that, take out that, or that's really good, leave that. I began to feel I could write. I was like a real writer, you know, and that's, you need to have some kind of, you know, it can't all come from oneself. You need, and I'm sure all of you would probably agree, you know, you need other people to spur you on. But anyway, I came back to England and I was working here and stuff, and got the terrible news that Mandy had been murdered in Australia, out jogging in Queensland on holiday. And there's a big story there because, for a start, it was, you know, I mean, it's a murder. Somebody's being murdered is a story, you know, here, but also because she had a lot of friends in the media and she was a scriptwriter. You know, it really got a lot of publicity from people. And they did eventually catch the man who murdered her. They knew who he was pretty much from the start, but they had no proof. And there's a program there called 60 Minutes, which I believe they have in the States as well, kind of news program, you know. And he was interviewed and he said something that gave him away. And on the basis of that, he was put in prison.
Did he know her, or was he just
No, he was just driving. I think, I mean, from what we can understand, you know, she was jogging along the beach. He probably tried to say something to her. I mean, I've made this up, so, you know, because nobody was there. So nobody witnessed it, but he was very gorgeous, although I don't think that would have been an issue. I think he would just have stopped any lone woman. But and she would probably have told him to F off or something, because she didn't, you know, prisoners, as it were, or she didn't suffer fools. And yeah, it was a very brutal murder. He ran her over in his truck and then strangled her, you know, drowned, raped. It was, I mean, it really was a horrible murder. And she was only 36. And I'd written a novel by that time, which was a sort of romancy type story, and given it to Pandora Press, which was part of Routledge and Keegan Paul. This is when I was 28. And at the time, Pandora Press, the editor, fiction editor there, was Jeanette Winterson. And she read the novel and really liked it and said, well, you can obviously write, this is really good, but this isn't right for us. It's more of a teenage story. Try another press for it. But which I actually did. And they said, you'll have to take out the sex, and I wouldn't. So that didn't get published.
Sorry to that, everybody. I'm going to add to what Lesley was just saying about having those jobs that help you write. When I was in Australia, I spent a year in Australia when I was in my early 20s, and I absolutely loved it. If we have any Aussies here, it was just the most incredible year. And one of my favorite ever jobs was working in a juice bar, for just the same reasons that Lesley said, that you're talking to people every day, meeting strangers. And this is the 90s. This is when people still used to get post. When you used to, people used to go to the poste restante and pick up their post. And if anyone remembers that from when they were traveling, and people would come into the juice bar and sit there with their post and go through. Sometimes there'd be tears, sometimes there'd be laughter. Welcome back, Lesley. It's good to see you. I'm talking about, you're still muted, by the way, Lesley. I'm talking about my job in Australia when I was backpacking. Ben, I think you need to allow her to unmute. But it is those kind of jobs which are just, they just let you get the time to kind of get your ideas together and write. Hi, Lesley.
Am I back?
You are back.
Oh, right.
Wonderful. So at the dramatic moment where you've met Jeanette Winterson.
Yes, that's right. So I said, I love this. You can obviously write, so write me a novel. So I mean, this is just amazing to have this happen.
Yeah.
well, and you know, I thought, oh my God, I've got to write a novel. But by that time, because of Mandy's death, I was a darker person, if you like. I realized what could, you know, the darker things of life. And I was very angry about her death. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I turned to crime, I suppose you might say. And I've written crime novels ever since. And of course, as one gets older, you know more about death and loss and grief. But also, you know, crime is about life, really. I mean, it allows you, the crime fiction genre allows you to write about life, all the gamut of life, relationships, family. But yeah, so I wrote my first crime novel, which was about a woman jogging along a beach in Sydney, actually, not in Queensland, where Mandy was murdered. And it's called 7 Miles from Sydney because I don't know if anybody knows, but there's a place in the suburb of Sydney called Manly, which is like a holiday resort, really, too. And I stayed there for a while. And you'd get the ferry. When you arrived in Manly on the ferry, it would say, "Welcome to Manly, 7 miles from Sydney, 1,000 miles from Care." And I just thought that was great. I always loved that. I mean, it's so cheesy, but I just loved it.
It is a beautiful place as well. It's a gorgeous place, Manly.
It is, yeah. I mean, I haven't been there for nearly 40 years now, of course, or 30 years maybe, but I loved it there. Yeah, so the book became, and actually my character, who isn't Mandy, is murdered in Manly. So hence the 7 miles from Sydney.
Yeah. And what did your friends in Australia think about that? Because that's such a personal thing to be inspired by.
I don't know how many. I mean, it did well in Australia, actually. I mean, I learned, because it wasn't my first novel. I think it was probably the third novel I'd written. I had a lot of novels that had started but never got finished, and then I'd finished the novel that Jeanette liked but rejected, and we've come on to rejection later. But it had some autobiographical elements in it, and obviously that's a true story, but I had changed it quite a bit. And anyway, you know, I mean, nobody made the connection. I mean, it was reviewed in the Sydney Morning Herald and the Melbourne Age, but nobody made the connection between that and Mandy's death, which was 2 years earlier, which was quite surprising in some ways, but I mean, you know, if they had, I would have talked about it. And I haven't actually talked about it for years. I started talking about it about 2 years ago. I didn't want it ever to be an event I exploited because it means too much. It's too important. And it is one of the reasons that inspired me to, you know, to write crime, as I say. But also it changed me. There was life before that and there was life after that in terms of, you know, what the world could be like, I suppose. Yes. And it's still an enduring concern. And Sarah Everard's murder last year, well, not just her murder. I mean, counting dead women. I won't go on about this, although we'll get, you know, but there's a Twitter account called Counting Dead Women, which publishes the number of women murdered every year by men, just for being there.
I noticed, I was really touched by that in the companion. You actually name Biba Henry, Nicole Smallman, and Sarah Everard in it. As I really brought it very up to date. Like, wow, gosh, this is right in the now. But it was really just like, oh gosh, that's such a good thing to do, to kind of say their names out loud and write them in a novel and remind people that this is, although this is a work of fiction, there are dead people who are killed for, you know, through, you know, just being there, as you say, being women in the wrong place, which is still something we have to panic about.
You made me realise I've done that more than once. I mean, one of my novels, and I forget which one it was, touches upon the Hammersmith murders, which happened in the 50s and early 60s in Hammersmith, which were 5 sex workers who were murdered. And they never found the killer, although they now think they know who he was. And the killing just stopped, and it's the person they think it was, he died, which is often what happens. But Stella Darnell, my quasi-detective in the Detective Daughter series, finds, as I did, the very tree against which one of the bodies was propped up, one of the women was found by police officers, propped up by Duke's Meadows in Chiswick. And because of sort of photographs of the time and not street view, No, I think it might. But anyway, and I went there and I worked out where it was and worked out which tree it was. And I have Stella walking around that tree and thinking about this woman, Elizabeth, forgotten her second name at this moment. And she sort of says R.I.P. to her. And so it's sort of, so she gets a mention. You know, I think there's something quite important about these women who led lives they're only known for the fact they were murdered, no other reason.
Yeah, that's such a chilling thought, isn't it? Only known for the fact you were murdered.
Yeah.
And
anyway.
Tell us about the Detective's Daughter series, because what happened after 7 Miles from Sydney, actually, before we get onto that? How long was it before you had your next book published? What happened? Because you were obviously working in other careers as well.
20 years gap between, I was 28 when I published that one, and then 48 when I published Kind of Vanishing, which was the one behind me.
So tell us about A Kind of Vanishing.
Yes, well, Kind of Vanishing is, I mean, it's set down in Sussex, or partially in Sussex and partially in Chiswick, or Hammersmith, Chiswick, where I grew up. And it's, I mean, I wrote it before Madeleine McCann disappeared, and it came out about 2 months after she disappeared. And the irony there is I had lots of questions about, is this based on Madeleine McCann?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to meet the author that can really rustle up a novel in 2 months and get it published.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
People did ask, you know, they were quite, and I think partly because some of it, you know, the response of the parents, I mean, it's not the same because the parents don't do lots of media stuff, but because it's different eras. She goes missing in 1968, and the novel is split between 1968 and 2000, well, 1999, and literally, you know, the Millennium Night. And during that time, she hasn't been found. But we do know then, it becomes clear who the murderer is. There was 2 little girls playing at Tide Mills, which is a lost village here in Sussex, where I live, near me in Lewes. It's down by the sea, which was what it says, Tide Mills. It was a village that grew up around the mills that were put there and driven by the tides, of great grain mills. And in the 19th century. It was finally demolished in the around about the time of the war to stop the Germans using it.
Oh, right. So that's how it was lost. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's there. You can see the flint walls, and they've done quite a lot of work. The Friends of Tide Mills have done quite a lot of work and excavated it. And we've got this notice boards now. In my day, when I wrote the novel, there was only one of those very old, looks like it's made out of pastry, a sort of model of the Tide Mills in a kind of creaky old museum in an area called Paradise Park, which sounds a little improbable and isn't really paradise at all. But it's one of those museums that they're disappearing now, which are run by creaky old volunteers, which I'm coming up for that age myself now, I guess. But you know, most of them elderly men who sort of stood around chatting in the corner, but they came over and chatted to me because they were inquisitive to see what I was there for. And it's fantastic because they had lots of memories and thoughts about the area. And that will all go, it has gone really. That museum is not what it was.
Right.
It's
yeah.
more it. I mean, you know, it's kind of more organised, but I liked its disorganisation really. Sort of wooden filing cabinets and a dusty smell. And anyway, that's not the point. But so the story is really about what happened to this little girl, Alice. Alice and Eleanor are playing hide and seek in 1968, and Eleanor's hiding, and Alice doesn't come to find her because she thinks she must be hiding and never finds her, and Alice is never seen again. And they didn't much like each other. They were forced to play with each other because they were the same age and they happened to be in the same area and they didn't have other people to play with. So their parents thought, what a good idea if they played together. I'm sure we've all been in that situation at some time or other when you have, because I'm 9, I've got to play with you. Not much else in common. And it came to me as an idea because I was listening to, I don't know how many people here listen to You and Yours, which I've always loved, and I particularly love Winifred Robinson. And they were talking about how you deal with a classmate dying, not being murdered particularly, but maybe run over or just getting an illness and dying. How you manage the class, how talk to the children about the loss of their classmate, and how can they grieve? What will make sense to them? 9-year-olds this was. And then, I was listening to this, that was interesting. And then they said, and you also have to think about the fact there'll be some children in the class who didn't like that girl or boy. And that's where my ears pricked up. I thought, how interesting. Yeah, I could immediately think of someone I would have quite liked to see not around, because I was bullied when I first arrived at primary school by somebody who tied me to the, well, she didn't tie me to the netball post. She just told me to put my hands behind it and stay there. But that was as good as being tied to it. Actually made my life a misery for the first few months of my arriving at school at the age of 5 or 6, whatever I was. So I was just thought, well, how interesting, because you might think that you've killed them in some way if you didn't like them and they disappear.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. So these two girls didn't particularly want to play with each other, and then one goes missing. What happens next? I just thought that was material for a novel.
I love the fact that you've given us your whole process there, from how this idea came to you and then working on it, but how extraordinary as well that it came out around the time of Madeleine McCann's disappearance. So that must have tinged all your book publicity with a really nasty flavor. That must have been a tough thing to do.
It did. Because also there was a possibility of film or television option, and they couldn't do it because of the, it would have been very bad taste. In the end, you go with what, it won a prize, it did well. But I was particularly, I suppose, struck by the fact that, and I'm sure other people, who are writing may have experienced this, that, you make up stories and they're true. You might take a true story and fictionalize it, but you might make up an idea, and then it happens. And I heard, it wasn't Madeleine McCann's mother, it was the mother of another child that had died, being interviewed about 5 years after I'd written The Kind of Vanishing. And her response was identical to the one, to the mother, to Alice's mother, who can't really deal with the fact that she's, she knows she's dead and she's not gone mad, or not saying mad, but she's perfectly well as a woman, but she continues to search for her, even though when she doesn't, because her body's never been found. And when she's looking, we first meet her in Marks and Spencer's. She's following a little girl with blonde hair around the shop with her mother's with her, the girl. Yeah. And she knows perfectly well that if Alice was, she found Alice, she'd be in her 30s by then, or whatever age, I forget, but she wouldn't be 9. And she knows that perfectly well, that she still looks for Alice as Alice would have been, and she buys clothes still for Alice, like she used to do. So, and this woman wasn't saying that, but she was saying what my character was also saying, that people would cross the street rather than talk to her, because she was ostracized, because people didn't know what to say to her. So it's better they didn't speak to her. So of course she was very lonely too. And I'm so struck by the fact I'd made this up, and there was this woman saying exactly that. And it just makes you realize that, our job in fiction is sometimes to express for other people the emotions that people will be feeling. It isn't just we'll hear the actual person talking, but we can enter the world, we can feel it ourselves.
Yes.
It's the writer, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. And it also shows how well you understood your characters, that you really got into this character and you created a totally believable character who acts exactly as, tragically, when something's happened like that in real life, the people do act. So that sounds amazing. So tell us about Stella in the Detective's Daughter series. How did she come about? Because this is a whole long series, which is wonderful. And what made you think, okay, this character isn't just for a one-off novel, this is going to be my series character?
Well, I have to say, when I first wrote it, I hadn't thought of it being a series. And I teach creative writing, as you know, and I discourage my students from thinking in serious terms when they're writing, because often they'll say, well, I'm leaving that bit for the next book. And you say, no, you don't know there'll be a next book. Tell this story and tell all of it. Don't leave anything that makes it slightly not the whole story. So, you can't be confident that, I knew I was going to, well, in fact, I didn't have a contract when I started writing Detective's Daughter too, but I did quite quickly get one. But I just thought, right, well, I'll write this story, and it's of itself, which I try always to do, actually. So actually, I mean, she ended up being an only child for a while, and when I knew she was a series, I didn't want her to be an only child. I mean, if anybody's thinking of writing a series or is writing a series, you'll know you need lots of people. It's like soap operas. Everybody has to have siblings, or they have to have aunts and uncles, because you need people to bring them in and have, if there's just one person in the whole world, you're a bit stuck. Anyway, that's sort of beside the point, but I hadn't thought she would be, an only child, for example. But I just had this idea. I wanted to have someone who was, and initially my title was The Unwilling Detective. Then it was The Unofficial Detective. And then finally it was The Daughter of the Late Detective, which was my homage to Catherine Mansfield's short story, The Daughters of the Late Colonel, which I just think is a great title.
Oh, yeah, brilliant.
It's a good story too, but I just love the title. It's just kind of, it's a story, almost like a little haiku, if you like. Anyway,
for those who haven't read about Stella, tell them who Stella is, as if you're introducing her to the party.
Sorry, I wander off. So Stella is a cleaner. She runs a cleaning company called Clean Slate, and she was determined not to be a detective like her father, who was a detective in the Met Police. And as the story opens, the first book opens, so I'm not plot spoiling, he dies of a heart attack. And in clearing out his house, which she does in quite a kind of business-like way, because she didn't think she had a very good relationship with him, and she was always being a bit angry with him. He was never there. He was always solving cases or not solving cases. And this is the crux of this story. But when she comes to clear out his house, which is her job, as she runs this company, they do house clearances when he's selling the house. They clean. I mean, she finds the boxes of an unsolved case in his attic. And it's the only room that's absolutely immaculate. And there are these boxes lined up. And she starts to shred it, because that's what she's doing, shredding everything, getting everything clear. She's not thinking much about it. She's keeping the salient papers. And then she gets pulled in. And she remembers the case from when she was a teenager, because it took him away from her. And so she feels a sort of, as she knows herself, a sort of unreasonable resentment towards Kate Rokesmith, the victim. But then she gets caught up in it and she starts working on it. And in the course of that, she meets Jack, who's an underground driver on the dead late shift on the district line. And they become a strange and uneasy detective team solving cases. And my thinking about her being a cleaner was that cleaners, like detectives, have the right to go into people's houses, provided they're invited, obviously. And they see other walks of life, they see other places, homes and people, but they also look into the darkest corners and they notice detail. And so it seemed to me a good parallel, and it's worked out that way. I mean, as time's gone by, I've realized more than I realized at the time that I'd chosen a really good occupation, because cleaners go everywhere. They clean crime scenes, they clean underground tunnels. They're not just cleaning people's houses. And I also wanted to say, let's hear it for cleaners, which I felt very much recently with the whole Partygate thing, when people were rude to the cleaners. Because one of the issues I look at is that Stella is invisible to lots of people because she's a cleaner. And she goes with that because she loves cleaning, and she loves deep cleaning more than anything else. But she's very aware that she's treated, sometimes without respect by people. Other times she's treated as a kind of confessor, or whatever the phrase is. They want to tell her all about their lives and she just listens. But I realized as the books go on, it's an ideal occupation for a character to have if they're going to be a detective.
Yeah, brilliant. I thought it was a really good idea, and I wondered how it had come to you, because I love the fact that she can enter all these different worlds. So I wondered what it was, if that was something that, it sounds like it was a happy coincidence. It wasn't something that you sat down and thought, could a cleaner do this, that, and the other?
Up to a point, yes. I mean, I thought, well, she could enter houses and she would. And one of the things I did think was that we might see the world according to our occupations. And that was something I thought of while I was writing A Kind of Vanishing, because Alice's father, the girl who goes missing, is a postman, and he sees people's houses and paths in the way that a postman, in my mind, could see them. He notices, well, he obviously notices if there's a dog there, but he also notices where the letterbox is placed. He also notices the plants that have grown up a path to the house, if that's the case. So his mindset is is that way. If he's not working, he'll still notice letterboxes and doors. And I just like the idea that we see according to what we do, if you like, or according to, I suppose, what interests us. And I sort of got the idea from Agatha Christie's The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, which I think is a tremendous book, in which Poirot invites the butler to come into the room to look at the room where Roger Ackroyd has been murdered. And because they can't see anything particularly odd about the room, it looks fine. But Poirot said, "I'll get the butler in because he will." And anyway, his thinking was, he's the butler, he's used to this room and he's used to using it in a certain way, and things being where they should. And immediately, the butler notices that the armchair isn't where it should be, and that's the clue. And I just thought that was brilliant. And so, and that's another thing I talk about with students, because it's partly your character's character, if you like, and what they do determines how they are. So that's kind of how it happened, I guess.
Brilliant. I'd just like to say here, thank you so much for bringing Agatha Christie in, because I just want to tell everybody from Goldster that we are going to have an Agatha Christie themed month in September. That's our plan. We're thinking about it at the moment, and I'm hoping people think that's a good idea, because a lot of people who come and talk about Agatha Christie, she's obviously a huge influence on many writers. And there's just so many people whose writing is inspired by her. So that's something we're thinking of putting together. I can see a couple of smiling faces, so I hope that is a good thing. So were you very influenced by Agatha Christie? I know that you work with Ellie Griffiths when you teach, and I know she's very influenced by Agatha Christie. Are there other writers who have a great influence on you?
Yeah, initially, no, I wasn't. I read Agatha Christie when I was in my teens, up until my 20s. Then I was a bit snotty about her and thought, well, it's just a puzzle, isn't it? And, characters don't develop. And there's a certain truth there. I mean, Poirot and Miss Marple ought to be dead several times over, really, with the amount of years that are.
The public wouldn't let her kill them off, that's why.
But they don't age. They don't. I mean, nowadays, most writers do tend to,
Yes.
you mentioned, we've seen Ruth have a baby, and then Ruth's, Kate grows up, becomes, a teenager now. And so I was a bit snotty for a while about it. And in that period, I discovered Ruth Rendell writing as Barbara Vine. And I just thought, wow, this is what I want to write. This is the sort of book I want to write. Not so much who done it, but why was it done and what happened next. The psychological elements, I suppose. And so I just loved her books. I also was a great fan of Sarah Paretsky and Sue Grafton in America. But I just bought every single Ruth Rendell as it came out. I was less interested in the Wexfords, but I did read them. But I just loved her Barbara Vine books. I was lucky enough to meet her once. Well, it was quite a funny story, actually, because my agent knew her, and my agent was asked to feed her cats while she was away. They were friends, and she lived in the countryside, so it wasn't just it wasn't a boring thing to be asked. And she said, could she bring me with her? And Ruth said, absolutely, of course, because she said he's writing a novel, and she's all. And so I took my Amstrad in my car. I mean, all the stuff you had to have. This was the 80s. So my Amstrad, the monitor, the keyboard, and my notebooks. And I wrote my novel for a week in Ruth Rendell's house, which was quite something. And she came back.
Fantastic.
It was very sweet, and the husband was very sweet. That's not really the point, but I was able to tell her, you really have influenced me. I loved Fatal Inversion, which I think is the one set in 1976. And I'm influenced by that. I mean, the Kind of Vanishing is set in the heat of not 1976, as I said, it's 68, but it's a hot summer. And that was, in my mind, a homage to Ruth Rendell. But since then, I've written The House with No Rooms, set in gardens, and that's during 1976 as well. So I think, which I lived through, so it's quite seminal anyway.
Tell us about that one.
The House with No Rooms.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's another detective's daughter novel, and it's, as I say, it's set in Kew Gardens, which was a place I used to go to all the time when I was young. You could, without it costing you, taking out a mortgage virtually. In those days, it was a penny.
Wow.
Penny in the turnstile, and it was up the road from where I lived. So my mum used to take me and my mates there. It was like going to the park, and it was lovely.
It's about £18 to visit for once now.
Yes, it is. It is. I mean, when I was researching for the novel, I took out a Friends of Kew pass, which worked out much better because I'm at times, but nevertheless, I mean, it's very different to the days when it was a penny. And I partially got that idea from apart from that, I love Kew Gardens, so I'd been there, and my partner noticed that the flowers had numbers on them, which was their cataloguing process, but the little sign would have a number on it, and said, "Oh, Jack would love this," because Jack, my character, who's the underground train driver, he reads signs out of registration numbers and numbers anyway. He will add them up. He'll make kind of like today's a good day or something, much to Stella's disgust, really, because she's very straight on. And I started thinking, this would be such a good place to set a novel. And I also knew that I immediately knew where I wanted to set it. I don't know if anyone has ever been to the Marianne North Gallery in Kew Gardens. She was a Victorian explorer, really, but she was a painter and artist. And
fascinating woman.
Absolutely, I mean, brilliant. Because she never married and she inherited her father's wealth, she had some freedom that generally women wouldn't have had in those days. And she would trot off in her great long skirts, carrying her easel and everything else, to various countries all over the world. And people would say, like, when you're somewhere in like Jamaica or Australia, don't go up that road, it's very dangerous, etc. There's bandits or whatever else. And off she'd go, because she was fearless, and she'd sit down, and she was looked askance upon by botanists because she painted flowers and shrubs, etc., in their natural habitats in the environment. And a botanist wants the elements of a plant, and it's usually an ink drawing, so that they can actually really kind of look at the various, as I say, the elements, and if you have it in context, you're cluttering the whole thing up. But now, of course, they're really valuable because a lot of those plants are extinct, and so to see where they grew and what they grew amongst is important. So that she's come into her own some 100 years or more since her death. But anyway, House with No Rooms that is actually her gallery that she paid for to have built in the gardens. And from the outside, it looks like a classic sort of colonial house with a veranda and a front door and a porch. And you go in, and the walls are just cheek by jowl covered in these wonderful illustrations. There's 850 or so of them. And I just, as crime writers do, I thought, I've got to set a murder here. Beautiful place, put a body there. And at the same time as I was having this idea, there was a program on Radio 4, always Radio 4 for me, honestly, what a source of inspiration it is. Just after The World at One, at lunchtimes, quarter of an hour a day, it was on for about a month, I think, which looked at the poison plant, different poisons and medicines that plants could provide. And it was based around Kew Gardens, because that's where all those plants are, of course. So lots of interviews with people. And anyway, cutting it very short, I had a friend who knew the producer, who we met through dog walking, which is one of my big things. And dog walking class, this man was there, and he said, "Oh, well, I know the producer of that program." And he put me in touch with him. And he said, he gave me the names of the people I should talk to at Kew Gardens. And I could say his name, which is obviously that gave me an in. And I went and interviewed all these different people. And most importantly, most excitingly to me was Lucy Smith, who's their chief botanical illustrator. She's only in like maybe she's early 40s now, but she was young. And she worked in the artist room in the herbarium at Kew Gardens. And she's still doing the same job that was done 200 years earlier, because that hasn't changed. Photographs, the technology and the progress of photography has not affected botanical illustration. It still has to be done pen and ink.
Fantastic! Wow.
So of course, I thought I'll have a character who's a botanical illustrator, and somebody's murdered in one of the galleries in the House with No Rooms. And Stella finds a body because Stella is a cleaner, which brings me right back to, I also interviewed the man who's in charge of cleaning at Kew Gardens, and he told me what she would need to clean the house, to clean the gallery, what you couldn't use detergents and things like that. And he told me how he'd win the contract and everything. It was a fantastic experience researching for it. And but I mean, I have to do one thing I have to say is I'm very worried that the people I talk to would not like me saying I'm a crime writer, there's going to be a murder here. And I remember talking to one person and I said, I'm really sorry, but actually there's going to be murder here. And she said, oh, that's fantastic. I mean, that's so right. I mean, there's so many people here who want to murder somebody. There's all the competition, there's competition between the disciplines of botanical disciplines. And so actually, I think they were quite pleased there was going to be a body found.
So, well, tell us about The Companion, because I've realized we haven't got on into your most recent novel. We've been talking about all your other novels, which I must say to everyone, if you haven't read them yet, you've really got to start reading Detective's Daughter, and it's a really fun series. But The Companion is just great. So that's just come out, hasn't it? And I've just found it really compelling. Without giving any spoilers, do you want to tell everybody what it's about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always, as I've sort of been nattering away about over this last sort of 45 minutes, I'm just interested in groups and how they get on and how they don't get on and who might like somebody and who might not. And I had this idea. I wanted to write, because this brings me right back to Agatha Christie, who I've come back to full circle in my older age. And I just love her books. I'm rereading them at the moment. And I love A Country House Murder. And I've always said to students, write what you like to read. You don't know about anybody else. You can't legislate for them. Write what you like. And I love A Country House Murder. That's just, I'm in my element then. So I thought, well, I want to write this. I wanted this an up-to-date one. And I just got a friend who lives, and I'm allowed to say where it was, Sheffield Park House, which is in the house in Sheffield Park. And he lives in a flat in that park. And then in tandem to that, with Ellie Griffiths, I teach a crime writing certificate course at Westdean House in Chichester in West Sussex. So I have access to these two country houses, classic country houses. One is a college and one is now divided into flats. So I just thought I'm going to have a country house now divided into flats. It used to be owned by the Earl Blacklock, and he died sliding down the banisters and landing on his head. And the Earlship went to a distant cousin in America who then, when he died, it was sold to developers and they made it into flats in the 50s. So they've been there quite a while, these flats. There's a bunch of people living there, and it quickly becomes apparent that very few of them, well, none of them like each other, actually. I think there's one that they like Rex, everybody likes him. But everybody else is tolerated, and everybody else, I was laughing because I was interviewed recently and somebody said, you've created this group of grotesque people who are really weird, they're oddities. And I said, oh, I thought they were normal. So I was a bit taken aback because I just thought they were of themselves, but they were, but then I'm liable to think I'm a great fan of Victorian literature, as Lucinda knows, and I tend to take Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens's characters at face value. I don't think they're grotesque. So about me, perhaps, but anyway. So this story is set in, and of course there is a murder, and the detective is a police detective, and she's appeared, although it's a standalone, she's appeared in a previous novel, Death of a Mermaid, and her friend Freddie Power is a mobile fishmonger, which is another occupation I thought really good for being able to observe things.
Yes, I thought it was a great idea.
Freddie gets everywhere because she's in her van selling fish, and so when this murder happens, she's able to talk to her friend Tony about the characters. So we get a description from her view, and from her view, they're customers as well. So. Some of them don't pay, for example, or they'll pay next week. And Tony said, well, you don't make any money this way, for goodness sake. But she says what she tells her about them, but she also tells her what fish they like. So it's going back to that thing I said about occupations, all of this adds to, I think, the richness of the whole thing. But so these two are kind of in tandem, if you like, investigating. There's more than one murder because there's a serial killer on the loose. And this country house is in the middle of nowhere, and there's woods to one side, and beyond the woods is heathland. So I had great fun with all of that because, I mean, you think, heaths, you go Wuthering Heights or Thomas Hardy, and we have heathland where I live in Sussex. So I did a lot of tramping around the various heaths, looking at the flowers and listening to the sounds. So yeah, I think that probably, have I missed anything that I might?
No, it's a really, really good read. I found absolutely, I've got to get on with some other work. I can't keep reading this. Really enjoyed it. And we've got a comment from Jean. I'm in Spain for 6 weeks, so I know what I'll be reading now. So yes. Now, someone already asked about your course, and I think I've found the certificate in crime writing. So I'm going to post this on the chat just in case anybody is near enough. And you say it's in Chichester, Westdean?
Westdean is actually in Westdean. It's a village, and it was owned by Edward James, who was the patron of the Surrealist movement. And for a long time, there were quite a lot of Salvador Dali there. There's a few items still, and Magritte. But it's this country house, so it's perfect setting for reading and talking about and writing crime novels. And Domenica and I, Ellie Griffiths, her writing name is Ellie Griffiths, teach this over 3 weekends, Friday till Sunday. I do one, she does one, and then we do one together. And our last weekend includes Graham Bartlett, who was senior police officer in Sussex. And he talks us through a crime scene. He sets out the crime scene and talks it all through. And he interviews each of us as if we were in trouble. And it's quite scary actually, because he's a very nice man, but then he's not very nice when he gets.
I'm sure it must be quite intimidating.
Really quite interesting. It was a very interesting experience, but he's also actually just written a crime novel himself. He's great grace actually. If anybody likes Peter James, he's Peter James's police officer, and he's now written himself. But he comes on the last weekend. So it's a great. I mean, we've had some good feedback from it, because I shouldn't be saying it's a great course, but the thought it was a great course, and a few of them have gone on to do the MA in creative writing that we also teach on.
Great. And do you enjoy teaching as well? Because obviously you're writing, you get, I'm assuming, a good income from your writing. It does well, and you just do it for the love of teaching and wanting to pass that on. Yeah,
that's a bit of an irony really, because my mum was a teacher and a head teacher by the time she retired. And I looked at her, and my uncle and my aunt were as well. And I looked at them all and I thought, I'm not doing that. And also I looked at my own teachers and I thought, this is hard work. like this one, or, I mean, it really did. Mum worked terribly hard, weekends, holidays, these supposedly 6 weeks holidays, they were 4 weeks really, one way or the other. And I just thought, no way, I'm not ever going to teach. And here I am teaching. I'm not teaching primary or secondary school kids, but I'm teaching adults like everybody here. But I absolutely love it. And I think it's improved my writing, because, you're learning from people too. And you're also, if you're talking about a process and you're reflecting on your own process and thinking, well, I could do that instead, couldn't I? Or, well, that's interesting. And you're always reading up to see the latest stuff that people are talking about. And reading books, I teach The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, for example, because I knew what a brilliant book it was.
Yeah.
As a consequence of that, I must have read it about 10 times now, and you find something new every time. So altogether, it's a really rich experience. And I've literally, as of yesterday, finished the marking for the MA students at Westdean. And the quality of writing, and the change in that writing over the 2 years they've been doing the course, it's rewarding, exciting, and I read the first 25,000 words of 4 people's novels. And they were all great. I mean, what's not to like? It was such a privilege, I'd say.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm just going to ask you to just stay there for a minute while I tell people what is coming up, and then we're going to come back. So everybody, tomorrow, Humphrey is back for the Inside Story, and he is interviewing Victoria Schofield, author of The Fragrance of Tears, My Friendship with Benazir Bhutto. And then next Thursday, the 23rd, I'm going to be speaking to Victoria Panton-Bacon, who's got a brand new book out. She just got her author copies a couple of days ago. It's called Remarkable Women of the Second World War, a collection of untold stories. And these are people, a bit like you mentioned earlier, Lesley, where you said, women who are only known for being murdered. These were women who weren't known for anything at all, except they did wonderful things, and she has managed to find those stories. And then Humphrey is back on the 30th of June with Maggie Piggott, who is talking about her new book, How to Age Joyfully. So we've also got coming up on PPG, which is our sister program, on a Tuesday lunchtime. And the next one is with Rosie Stancer, who is interviewing Stephen Jones, speaker, lecturer, expedition leader, and operations manager. And he's been living and working in high-risk environments for 30 years, an expert on polar expeditions, expedition planning, and safety management. As the expeditions manager for the American company Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions, he's worked with more than 250 people who have skied to the South Pole. He's also dealt with managing crises such as terrorist bombings and rescuing stranded climbers. So really, really fascinating. So I hope you'll come back and join us for some of those. So Lesley, as you know, Goldster is all about healthy aging. So have you got any tips for people on how to age healthily, or how to enjoy the time when as you're getting older and you suddenly think, I don't have to be beholden to doing the 9 to 5 for other people?
Yes, I mean, I'd say, well, you know, it's so difficult, isn't it? Because we live in such a tough world. We've got to do jobs when we don't want to because we need money and living costs going up, all that. But within all of that, I guess, I mean, one thing we mentioned at the beginning of this is that I walk the dog every morning, and this is at about sort of 7 o'clock, so before it's too hot or whatever. But the main reason is before the day begins, and I meet a bunch of friends there. So there's I mean, sometimes we go to Lewis Priory to walk, and that's just a beautiful place to walk. It's very, you know, meditative. I mean, it's been knocked down during the dissolution, of course, but it features in C.J. Sanson's novels. But also 2 days a week, we walk with friends, a couple of friends, and a much longer walk and a more arduous walk. It's still at 7 o'clock, and one of them takes you right above Lewis, and you can see for miles. And I come back, I feel it's not just that my legs are aching because you have to climb, but also that my soul has been fed, if you like. All of this is with the dog. And I wasn't a dog person when I was young, and I'm not really a dog person now. I have to say, I've got a poodle, and he's more like a cat. And he doesn't molt, and he's sort of fragrant smelling, and well, most of the time. He's my companion. He's a writer's companion. And the Dog Walker, one of my novels, is dedicated to him because he basically gave me the idea. But so I suppose I found, and especially in lockdown, found owning a pet was a really important thing in terms of feeling. Just watching him sometimes, just observing him can make me feel calmer. Walking, but I walk all the time. So I guess I've done the gym in my time. I don't do it now. I just wouldn't get there. I'd take the thing out. I wouldn't go. And yoga I do, not enough, but I've got a friend who teaches it. And since lockdown, she's been making stuff online, and I do that with her online. And otherwise, meditation too. I do body scans, full body scans, lying in mindfulness stuff, you know.
I'm amazed you've got time for your writing.
Well, I think I haven't had enough time for what I've just been doing. I probably managed about once a week. I'm not very organized. I'm not very, what's the word? I'm very disciplined when it comes to writing, but that's about it in terms of all my jobs, whatever. But not well, you know, I could look after myself even better, I think. And so I guess really biggest thing I'd say is walking, because when I'm walking, if I've got an issue, whether it's any other issue, but mostly I'm thinking of writing, it's sorted. You know, it slides into place. It happens almost every time. Quite
I agree. I find it really, really useful. Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time, but I've just had one more question. What is your top tip for somebody starting out in writing?
Well, really, I think, you know, just have the idea and don't talk about it, as in don't talk about it, do it. Start writing it.
Yeah.
Don't, you know, I mean, and I was asked to say a while back, somebody asked me, and I basically said, you know, just start writing. It doesn't matter if it's nonsense, because eventually it'll start to take off. It's a bit like pushing a car. And you just have to have that confidence that it will start. because otherwise, if you wait for the muse to come, well, it won't. It doesn't work like that.
I think that's really good. So that's a fantastic tip. If you're thinking about writing something, don't talk about it, actually write it. Thank you. I think that is a very good note to end on. Thank you so much, Lesley. It has been a real joy meeting you, and I've so enjoyed the companion. Please, I don't actually have it to hold up because I've got it on Kindle, but do you have a copy there to show everybody what it looks like? Fantastic. And it's just a really good book, and I think you'll enjoy it. And yes, while you're in Spain for 6 weeks, I think you'll have a great time, Jean. Do enjoy it. Everybody, take care of yourselves. You'll be with Humphrey tomorrow, and I will see you next week. All right, take care, everybody, and have a great rest of the week. Thank you so much, Lesley. Lesley and I will turn off our videos now, and then Ben will end the meeting. Bye.